My name is Erin Paskey. I'm the owner of Nashville Dyslexia Center. Nashville Dyslexia Center is a private tutoring service to teach students with dyslexia how to read and spell. Besides providing students with the very best of individualized instruction in reading, I'm also on a mission to educate our community about dyslexia and to empower parents to help their children thrive. Today, I'm joined by Tricia Thornton of Tricia Thornton Therapy. Tricia is a licensed professional counselor and a registered play therapist. Her past experience includes work as a school counselor in public and private schools. Today, she works with children and families in her private practice in Nashville. Welcome, Tricia. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, Tricia, I wanted to bring you on today because besides reading and spelling, there's a lot more to dyslexia, and we want to make sure that we are caring for the whole child. So to introduce our viewers to play therapy, tell us a little bit about what play therapy is.
Okay, I sure will. Play therapy is a systematic approach, and I use that word very particularly because the view of play therapy can kind of be misconstrued sometimes and maybe not even understood. So I'm going to start with a quote from Gary Landreth, who I kind of consider the grandfather of play therapy. Play is a medium for expressing feelings, exploring relationships, and self-fulfillment. And I like to describe children's language as play. It's their natural medium. And so when a child comes into my playroom/office, I consider play as my main tool. The most important thing, though, is the therapeutic relationship I have with the child. And as long as that becomes the focal point, and then I use other mediums to help guide the play, then the child feels safe and freedom to express their emotions in their natural language, which is play. So I use a variety of tools, and there's a lot of different ways you can look at play therapy, child-centered versus directive, kind of a hybrid of both. And I'm a little bit of a hybrid of both. So that's a little bit of a definition. You can also, parents can go to apt.org, which is the American Play Therapy Association, and they'll find out tons of information there. There's also some on my website.
Tricia, you said that play is the language of children, and that makes perfect sense. If a child needs a little bit more support, why not do it through that language of play, which comes so naturally to them?
Correct.
So, Tricia, I work with students with dyslexia as their tutor to teach them how to read and spell. And some of them do have a difficult time emotionally. It's just a challenging time for them as they're in the classroom and not being understood by their teachers or their peers. Maybe their parents aren't understanding how to help them. So their experience really goes beyond just help with reading and spelling. Tell us about some of those emotions that children with dyslexia might be experiencing.
Absolutely. There's a variety, but I kind of say there's four main ones. So anxiety, anger, issues with their self-image, you can even say lower self-esteem, and sibling rivalry. So all the emotions that come with that as well. So those are kind of the four main categories. What I find is anxiety is the most prevalent emotion that I find with children with any kind of learning disability.
I would agree. Sometimes that anxiety seems to come out sideways, even in our tutoring sessions.
Absolutely.
And that can really wreak havoc, not just in tutoring, but on the family life in general. What are some ways that parents can help their children at home cope with some of these difficult emotions they might be feeling?
Of course, yes. And before I get there, I do want to show you a handout that I think might help parents, because one of the way the parents can help the children is to learn a lot about anxiety and what's happening in their brains and what's happening in their bodies. And so this is a great handout. I have this on my website posted. It's also on my Tricia Thornton Therapy Facebook page. But it's 8 ways that a child's anxiety is masked. And so if you don't mind, Erin, I'm just going to tell all 8 really quickly. And I think that will give parents even more of what to look for. So anger, number 1. So if you notice before, I said anger was one of the 4 emotions because it's so part of anxiety. But a lot of attention issues and a lot of even other disorders that are diagnosed in children, a lot of times there's misdiagnoses because it's really just anxiety. That's the root of all this. So anger, difficulty sleeping, defiance. So we all kind of can recognize that pretty easily. Chandeliering would be when they fly off within 0 to 10 seconds, they're flying off the chandelier. Kind of a real temper tantrum. A lack of focus, avoidance, negativity, and over planning, which a lot of times parents will start to do as well to compensate for the different emotions that are going on in the home. So I hope that kind of gives just a little bit more about, in particular, anxiety. But what can parents do to help? My number 1 suggestion to parents is to understand what anxiety is, what these different emotions are, and how it is affecting the brain of the child. And really, too, being able to recognize what their child's emotions are doing to them. So what's the trigger? What's happening in their own bodies and in their own minds when the child is starting to have a variety of emotions? So I like to use a brain model. And if you don't mind, I'll show it to you because I do think it's so helpful. So this is, our forehead. So this is right behind here. This is the prefrontal cortex. And then all back here is the brain stem going down to your spinal cord. And when I open this in session with my children, they just go, oh, my goodness, there's really that many colors? And I'm like, no, it's really just gray and white. But here it is. This is the green area on my model. It's the prefrontal cortex. And then I added this little black dot called the amygdala. It wasn't in my brain model. And then the thalamus. So those are the 3 areas that I really like to concentrate on. This is kind of the limbic area. And so what happens all day long, and when parents begin to understand this, and then they're able to explain it, or I or another tutor or a therapist can explain this to a child, it is so empowering for the child to realize that this is actually an issue structurally with their brain, but not because they're not trying hard enough or because they're not a good enough reader. So it really helps to kind of free them up. So all day long, messages are coming into your thalamus and they're routed either to the prefrontal cortex or to the amygdala. When they get stuck in that amygdala is when we start to see the reactions like the anxiety and the anger. So I can go into tons more detail, but you just tell me how much more you want me to go into. But I think the main place I have parents start is to understand neurologically what's going on. And then they can begin to explain it a little bit easier to their children.
That's extremely helpful
Mhm.
because we do tell families that dyslexia is a brain difference. It's not just a difference with the processes of reading and language, but there may also be differences in how emotions are processed, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Absolutely. So in our brains, there's 2 different kind of matter. There's gray matter and white matter. So gray matter is kind of throughout the brain. You can see it throughout. The white matter is a little bit deeper, kind of within this kind of area of the brain. And so both they've found in research and brain scans and being able to study a dyslexic brain versus a brain without dyslexia, that a dyslexic brain has a little bit of less of each white and gray matter. So the gray matter is responsible for processing information just in general. And then the white matter is responsible for transmitting that information from region to region. So if we're trying to get the message to go up to the prefrontal cortex so we can think clearly about what's going on and realize that it's not a real life and death emergency, but we're just having an emotion of anger or whatever the emotion is. And out of this area, if the processing speed and the transmitting speed is slower in a dyslexic brain, it's going to take longer for that message to get up here, which is why a lot of times we see a child with dyslexia having a harder time to manage those emotions. It takes them a little bit longer to be able to regulate that emotion.
That's fascinating.
It is
Well,
very fascinating. I think the brain is a huge piece of it. And children really, I'm sorry, Erin, I watch them come in my office and light up when I tell them, you know what, we know you're trying really hard. You know, this is not about trying, it's about understanding that we can do different things to help our brains be able to process our emotions.
absolutely. Well, it's cliche to say it, but knowledge is really empowering.
It is. That's exactly true.
So,
Mhm.
in light of all that, share with us your favorite 1 or 2 techniques that parents can try at home when they see their child is about to have a meltdown or is starting to become very anxious due to some of these learning difficulties. What 1 or 2 techniques have you found to be helpful for parents?
Absolutely. I'm first going to point out a book that I highly recommend, which is by Dan Siegel, is the main author, Tina Bryson as well, and it's called The Whole Brain Child. Anytime a parent can find videos on YouTube kind of explaining about the brain and emotions, Dan Siegel has some really great information out there. There's YouTube video after YouTube video that's helpful. So as far as the tool that I like for parents to go to, I like them to do a little bit of reading and the whole parent approach, kind of like what you said at the very beginning, like we like to see this as a whole child. And the whole parenting approach is being able to first connect emotionally with your child. I point to that brain. So connect emotionally, then bring in the logic. So first being able to say to a child, I hear you're angry. I see that you're really, really upset. Then pause, and then when in time it's appropriate, bring in the logic. And so that logic might be giving them a tool. And so one of my favorites is using the 5 senses. And this is scientifically, there's a logic to this too, because in the brain, remember that all day long those messages are coming in through the thalamus. They're coming in from your 5 senses all day. So I always like to kind of review. I know the parents know, but so it's seeing, hearing, touch or feel, smell, and taste. So those are our 5 senses. And so what we do is I teach the 5 senses activity. It is simple. And also parents can do this. Between you and me and everybody listening, I used to do it all the time driving. I still do, but when my kids were in the back and they were yelling and loud, and I was sitting there just gripping the steering wheel with my white knuckles, doing this activity helps to slow you down to be able to get that message back up here so you can think clearly. And so you simply do this. What are 3 things I see? And you look around and say 3 things you see. There's no right or wrong answer. So your over planning perfectionistic children will keep asking, is that okay? Is that right? Is that right? Doesn't matter. So really trying to help them understand, they're just telling you the first things they see. 3 things you hear, 3 things you touch or feel, and then move on. The younger children, and maybe 6 or so and younger, they may only be able to do what do they see and hear. And that may be enough. If you don't feel like they're kind of calming down, then ask the 3 questions again. And so for parents and older children, they may go through all 5 senses And, I mean, unless you just ate something, you don't really have a whole lot of taste in your mouth. So you may go through all 5, and you might need to go through all 5 again, 2 and 3 and 4 times. So my 5 senses activity is my number one. I love it. I teach it often. We'll walk around the office. I'll walk around the halls, and we'll do it together. And it really helps them to understand. I'll have parents, put a 5 on a sticky note and put it in different places around their room or house, things like that. So that's my number one. My other number one is deep breathing and movement. And there's a lot of great, cute YouTube videos. Sesame Street has a bunch out of teaching how to do deep breathing. Bubble breathing is another way to say it. I pretend and help children, and sometimes I'll actually use bubbles in my office. And bubbles, by the way, are a great deregulator. So they bring a child down and help them to kind of calm down. And so teaching them that they can blow a bubble is kind of similar to the deep breathing, and really making sure they understand that when they breathe in, they keep their mouth closed, breathe out, they open their mouth. And then movement, if you can ideally move at the same time of doing deep breathing. So that could just be all a child may be able to do in that temper tantrum moment is this, and that's okay. So it doesn't really matter what exactly the movement is. The movement is not trying to get your heart rate up. We're not doing necessarily cardio exercising, but just kind of a stretching or a yoga type movement and deep breathing at the same time. So those are my 2 absolutes that I go to every time.
Tricia, those are both extremely useful. And to cycle back to the first one, the 5 senses, while you were describing it, I was really excited because when I teach students to read, we do it in a multi-sensory manner. We are trying to use our eyes, our ears, or paying attention to what we feel, not necessarily with our hands, but what we feel in our mouth when we make the sounds. And it does help bring everything full circle, makes a complete picture for that child, and kind of helps bring things back under control.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing both of those. And I will make sure as I post this content to provide links to the book and the other resources that you've mentioned. So Tricia, let's say a parent has tried some of these techniques. They have done research on how to help their child emotionally, but they're just not seeming to make progress. When might a child benefit from seeing a counselor or a therapist?
So usually I kind of think of it as the bell curve. So if you're familiar with the bell curve, it kind of goes like this, and in the middle of the bell curve is at average. Down here is kind of the outliers, both sides. So if you notice that your child their behavior and the emotions are tending to be on the outliers more often than in the average, which is kind of more calm, kind of a understood, I guess just a calm state, then if you feel like your child is constantly going to one of these outliers, that's a good sign that maybe we need to bring in someone else. And really what I see in this space, a lot of times I will say as a therapist to a parent that I'm holding space for their child. This is a place that is unbiased, not at home, not connected with any of the other emotions that go along with being home. It's their time. And it's rare in a home setting to have, or even in a school setting, to be able to have that much of a place that's their own, where they can really be able to be okay to process whatever the emotion is. And because I have used so many different mediums of play therapy tools like Sand Tray and the Dollhouse and lots of different therapeutic games and bibliotherapy and expressive arts therapy, all of these are purposeful in helping the child begin to process their emotions. So I always tell a parent, trust your gut on this, trust that sixth sense of just something just doesn't feel right. And don't be afraid to ask questions. And there's also, don't be afraid also to bring a child's school into helping. So I do a lot of school consultations where I try to kind of be the liaison between home and school and get everybody kind of on the same page and everybody thinking through things. I know a lot of children with dyslexia might have IEP meetings and 504 plans, and that helps. But it also helps to bring in the teacher, the school counselor, maybe a school psychologist, even a nurse sometimes, bring in everybody into the one place where we can all say, okay, this is what works well for the child, and this is what doesn't. So let's try to do the things that are going to empower the child. So my main thing, trust your gut, and also don't be afraid to invite help in. I always tell parents, I think they come in here and there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of doubt. They feel like they are not doing a good job as a parent, and that therapy is kind of the last resort. I've tried everything. And I really try to help parents understand that you're giving a gift to your child. You're giving a gift to your child, but also you're giving a gift to yourself. So, because we're exhausted as parents, we have a lot of plates that we're trying to balance in the air, and we're wearing a ton of hats. And especially right now, during the added umbrella of stress of the pandemic and all the different stuff that's going on in our country, we all need the cliche of the "it takes a village" is no more true than now. So we just kind of need to all come together and not be embarrassed even, or ashamed, or, oh, I can't pull anybody in, I've got to take care of all this myself. That's when they know that they need to probably get some help. And also, Erin, if the child's meltdowns and strong emotions are punching and pushing every button in a parent's psyche and body and emotions, they also will begin to recognize that they're not handling things as well as they wish they could. And that's another time to notice, okay, I think I'm going to go and seek out somebody to help.
So therapy is not just for the child who's struggling, it's really for the whole family to make a healthy family unit.
Absolutely. I come from a systems perspective, and so it is pretty rare that I would ever work just with a child and not bring in the parents or the caregivers in general. So whoever the main caregivers are to that child, those are the ones who I am trying to work with. And I work with them pretty regularly, whether it's individual sessions with parents, whether it's family therapy. Sometimes I'll do a mother-daughter session or a father-daughter or whatever kind of dyad. Sometimes I'll bring in the siblings and we'll do a full therapy session. So it's really catered to what the child and the family need. But always I look at child therapy as a family approach.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing that bit of encouragement for families too. Parents do come with some shame and some guilt sometimes that they're not able to figure out all the answers to their questions, or they're not able to pull their child out of these emotional problems or reading problems or whatever have you. And it really is okay to seek out the help of someone who can provide the tools that you need. So, Tricia, share with us where our viewers can find you and where they can learn more about your practice.
Absolutely. So they can go to my website, which is pretty simple, triciathorntontherapy.com. They can also follow me on Facebook, which is at Tricia Thornton Therapy. On Facebook, that is a great resource. I post articles there often. Every Thursday, I do a short 5 to 8, 10-minute video called T Cubed Corner. And I have a little puppet doll that I use named Buddy. And those sessions are geared more towards, I would say, kind of children more 8, 9 and under, maybe 10 or 11 or 12 too, but definitely kind of on the younger side. And it's for children to watch with their parents. And so that is a great resource. They're always recorded, so they're always on my Facebook. They also are on my website as well. And then they can certainly email me, and that is triciatherapy@gmail.com. I know you'll post all this. And then my phone number is 615-212-9977.
Well, Tricia Thornton, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the emotional side of dyslexia and play therapy. And so I thank you again for your time and your expertise today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.